Welcome. You're listening to The Weather Lounge, a podcast by WeatherWorks. Get ready to explore the world of weather and connect with engaging guests, bringing you fun and thought-provoking stories of just how weather shapes our lives, sometimes in ways you've never imagined. So, join us as we unravel the mysteries of the atmosphere. Today's episode starts right now.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and of course we come to you from our WeatherWorks headquarters located in Hackettstown, New Jersey. And joining me today and back in the saddle is fellow meteorologist Mike Mahalik. Hey there, Mike.
Hey, Brad, what's going on?
It's winter, and we got some things to talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always a lot of winter weather to talk about. It looks like things may be turning a little more wintry here, Brad, coming up.
To kind of build on that, Mike, we're gonna continue our conversation with one of our long range specialists here at WeatherWorks, meteorologist Kyle Leahy. We're gonna have him back here, and Kyle, it's been a crazy fall going into winter, but here we are.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're probably going to be entering one of the better patterns that we've had in quite a while. So I'm definitely looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, it's crazy, Kyle, because, man, not too long ago, maybe in the early fall, I mean, this winter wasn't looking all that cold, but then things started trending a little bit colder in November when you guys started doing the full outlook for the season. And yeah, now it looks like maybe even a full-blown Arctic outbreak is on the horizon here. And Kyle, I gotta ask, like, what changed here to all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but you know what I mean, that we're kind of flipping the switch and going into the cold air?
Yeah, so I feel like even though we did definitely lean warm this year, I am kind of happy that we were sort of pinpointing January as being a colder month. So that's kind of nice. But I think largely, so ironically enough, part of the reason why it's going to get so cold is because of how warm it's been over the last few days, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but it's been so warm because the Pacific jet has been really strong, and now it's weakening, and that's kind of leading to some changes, like with the Pacific, especially really. That's kind of what brings the cold in.
So the Pacific jet being strong, what does that really mean for our listeners out there? What does it do across the country?
Yeah, so it pretty much just overwhelms the country with just Pacific air. So instead of getting that Arctic air that we're talking about later this month, you just get a lot of just warm air off the ocean, and it really doesn't lead to much snow anywhere. They're generally kind of the warmest patterns, so it gets warmer, and it also makes systems move a lot faster. It's difficult for them to strengthen. So you're really just dealing with like a warm, pretty boring pattern for anyone that kind of wants any interesting weather.
Yeah, I'm sure any person who's a snow lover doesn't want to hear about warm, balmy weather for the winter season. Oh, it's going to rain again. Oh, good. Even though the rain's good here in the Northeast because of all the drought conditions that we had heading into the late summer months and into the fall. But yeah, I mean, certainly we want snow. People out there want snow who like it. Come on.
Yeah, at least we got that. We got that rainfall too in between, and things are at least improving across a good area of the East Coast. But you know what, Kyle? You know what really just kind of the most surprising thing to me is not only, yeah, I know we were talking about January being the best month, if you will, for cold and snow, but it's almost like, I mean, granted, we just went over into 2025 here. It's so, if there's any such a thing as called a lock, the cold air is a lock for the entire U.S. basically east of the Rockies. And I just, what surprised me the most is the depth of this upcoming cold snap. I mean, we're not just talking, all right, it's going to be kind of cold enough to snow, but we're talking some deep cold. I mean, places in the United States and even in the southeastern U.S., I mean, could be looking at the coldest temperatures in 15, 20 years.
Yeah, no, it's going to be like a legitimate like Arctic intrusion. Like it's not just going to be like we've seen the last couple of years. Even when it has gotten cold,
it was transient, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I believe there was one There was one really, really like like legit Arctic outbreak kind of. I wouldn't even call it an outbreak, but just the polar vortex kind of just drifted towards New England. I think it was like February 2023, I believe, and it was like super, super, super cold. I'm not sure if Mike you remember that at all, but it was like frigid. Like you had like wind chills in like the negative 20s and 30s, but it only lasted for like 2 days, and it got really warm
Yeah,
after.
that was when the polar vortex hit my backyard on January 12th, 2017. No, I'm kidding.
But yeah, no, like so this is going to be like a sustained period of like very cold
It's
weather.
got staying power, this one. It may not be as cold as it'll be at the peak of this thing, but it's going to be a long drawn out cold to where we could see some, some fun for like Mike just said, the snow lovers out there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
I do
it's
think. Oh, sorry, Mike. What were you about to
no,
say?
no, not a problem. I'm the one interrupting. So, my question is just what's causing this cold plunge to get dislodged out of the Arctic?
Yeah, well, what was all about this La Nina? I mean, we had the La Nina setting up, and it's changed though, right, Kyle?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I would say by the time the winter's over, it'll probably be designated as a weak La Nina. And weak La Ninas, weak El Ninos, like whenever there's pretty weak influence from the tropics like this, you can get sort of weird results. Also, we did have a really strong El Nino last year, and ironically enough, the pattern that's developing this January is kind of like the pattern that we were expecting last February. It's actually quite similar. So it's kind of ironic that we're seeing it now. But in terms of why it's happening, so yeah, so the Pacific jet is basically going to back up from sort of like right now it's kind of pushing into like crashing into the west coast, and this is because of the La Nina a little bit. It'll sort of back up more towards like the Gulf of Alaska, so like a few hundred miles west. And what that's going to do is it's going to take all of the low pressure on the west coast that's getting us really warm, and it's going to shift that low pressure west of Alaska. So then you get a lot of high pressure near Alaska and the west coast, and that's what dislodges all of the cold. Um, and then along with that, a lot of the warm air that's over us right now is going to get shot up towards Greenland. So there's just going to be a lot of high pressure in the Arctic, and when you have a lot of high pressure in the Arctic, it pretty much removes the cold air and it gets shot down here.
So it basically squeezes it down into the continental U.S. rather than just getting bottled up across the Arctic regions.
Exactly. So that's pretty much what's happening. So it's one of the best patterns you could have for it.
Meanwhile, you still have all the global patterns setting up properly, if you want to call it that, for the cold air to kind of what we call the cross polar flow, right?
Sometimes you can get high pressure like on the west coast, but it's not really all that cold because you can have like low pressure over like Russia or north of Alaska generally, like kind of over the pole. So then that way, like you're basically just getting like somewhat colder Pacific flow. Like you're just getting the warm air from the Pacific, and it's kind of like moving over Alaska and Western Canada, but it's not really ever cold. Here, though, you have high pressure basically stretching from like California all the way north, wrapping around to like Siberia. So you're getting a really good transport of like air from the pole and like parts of Russia rather than just like modified Pacific air.
So Kyle, we were just talking about, it's the teleconnections, right? You got the negative NAO, you got the negative AO, you got the positive PNA. What's the positive PNA again? A lot of folks always hear about the negative AO and NAO, but that's the Pacific, right?
Yes, yeah. The PNA is the pattern over like Western North America, which is actually kind of what it stands for. It's the Pacific North American pattern. But it's basically when it's positive, you have a lot of high pressure over the West Coast, and it kind of stretches into like the far Eastern Pacific. So when you have a positive PNA, that's really what brings the Arctic air here. So what you can have is you can have a pattern with a negative NAO, so like Greenland blocking. You can have even a negative EPO, which is pretty much just Alaskan blocking. That's really all that means. But if the PNA is negative, which has like this exact thing has happened the last couple of years, you get all of that Arctic air dumping into the west, and it's warm here. So yeah, so like the PNA is really what kind of allows the Arctic air to kind of slide off the Rockies and move into the plains in the southeast and the rest of the east.
Right, and you were talking about that earlier, how it's now retracting back, and that's why we're going to actually get this prolonged, and it's not going to come back anytime soon. So we're talking, into mid-January, we'll likely see this pattern. So the blocking sets up. We get that Greenland block. You get the high pressure, like you said, over Greenland. Now, there's different things you hear out there too with the east-based and west-based kind of negative NAO. So which is for snow lovers? What you want to see the western-based NAO, correct?
Yes, generally. The east-based blocks, that's pretty much where most of the high pressure is kind of just like, yeah, it's just set up east of Greenland. Like they can like help, but the thing is that they don't really truly block anything. What I mean by that is that if you have like a true like Greenland block, the Atlantic is just sort of a traffic jam of like low pressure. So everything really slows down. It's difficult for systems to just kind of fly up into Canada if they get really strong. A west-based block, though, on the other hand, that actually kind of allows the Atlantic to clog up. It forces a lot of systems to the south. And the reason why is because it's something called the 50-50 low. All of that means is just like low pressure, usually strong low pressure. It's slow moving. It's kind of near like Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. So kind of just like Atlantic Canada, basically. And that's like a defining feature of patterns that are quite snowy.
And that'll slow down the systems up the East Coast.
Exactly. So that feature is it's pretty much the defining feature for any kind of like larger storm. Really for New York City South, New England doesn't really need them that much. Like if you live in like northern New England, you actually kind of don't want these blocking patterns because things can just get squashed. Um, but for a decent portion of the Northeast, again, especially New York City South, it's really what you kind of want to see for a bigger system.
So I think, Kyle, we're talking about a lot of different oscillations, and hopefully people are following along there at home or wherever they are, listening to this on a treadmill or who knows what. But I think the main point is that what's setting up across the Arctic and across Alaska and across the West Coast, it's pretty much indicative of a snowy and cold pattern that you want to see. Is that correct?
Yes. Um, I think part of it is also that kind of Greenland blocking lessening. It sounds kind of counterintuitive, but generally, like if you have like a really strong block over Greenland that's not really doing anything, like it's just kind of remaining strong for a longer period of time. That doesn't really like do anything for snow unless you live in like Georgia or something like that. Like most of the time it just leads to cold and dry weather for a lot of the Northeast. What's really interesting is that we're seeing it weaken by the time you get towards like the 9th, 10th, 11th, somewhere around there. And that kind of like weakening west base block signal is a pretty strong indicator of the potential for something larger around that time. So I guess if you were like looking for something bigger, that would probably be the period to watch. I think it's been pretty consistent for a while. It's still showing up. It's it's still a ways away, but it's a pretty historic signal for you know, definitely a larger system, I think.
Yeah, it's already been all over social media, as has been a lot of other things going on. So yeah, that's the other thing. You got to watch what you follow and who you follow on social media. Of course, we have Facebook, we have X and things like that, and we're not going to guide people in the wrong directions. It's the folks out there that are leaning on every single model run and posting the snow maps and the Kushera snow maps. It just gets tiring, and it's so hard for these models, to look 7 days out and say, "Oh, this is going to happen next Sunday or next Monday at this time." There's so many moving parts; it's hard to do that. And the ensembles, of course, help a lot, but and again, the ensembles are what we're all following, and all the major models are showing this, major Arctic outbreak, cold air, sustained. So again, it's just going to have to piecemeal as we go on through the forecast periods and see how, everything. But a couple days out, we'll have a good idea of who's going to get snow and who's not. But on the flip side, Kyle, we mentioned this, and I'm sure a lot of folks have seen this already on social media. When you get these big cold outbreaks, there are areas now they're going to miss out on snow, and actually, like you were just saying, New England and things like that. Your snow chances may actually be a little bit lower because of the squashness, if you want to call it that, or suppression of some of these storms with the strong high pressure and strong cold air.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if you live up in New England, actually, You sort of don't really want Greenland blocking. Like most of New England's larger systems, I mean, not to say that it always hurts, but like they don't have a correlation with any of that. Like you can get a larger system there maybe with a little bit of blocking, but a lot of New England's largest storms have no blocking. I mean, the blizzard in January 2022 that had no blocking at all. There was the January 2015 blizzard, Juno. That also had no blocking. To many people that live in New York, it's probably why they hate that storm because there was no blocking. But yeah, so like New England, it just doesn't matter up there. If anything, yeah, if you live like north and west of 495, like you probably don't really want blocking. So I think if you live up there, not to say that you can't get anything, obviously, it's just too early to say anything like that. But you would probably want to wait until later in the month when the blocking kind of eases and we try to get towards more of a typical La Nina pattern. That's where you'd probably start to cash in a bit more, I think, because there's going to be a ton of cold air left around. And if you get that southeast ridge, that's typical of La Ninas to start to pop up, which I don't know. I mean, that should happen, but this winter has kind
It
of
actually start then favoring New England.
exactly. So if you're looking for something bigger up there, then that's the time frame I'd
Yeah,
put it
so
in.
maybe New England sits out the next couple of weeks, but they'll still get their due, and they'll get their and Mike will be happy for all of his folks up there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hope I don't want to discourage those up in New England here because there's a lot of moving parts here that can still go along with this pattern and create a snowstorm. But it's just nice to see a more cold and snowy pattern that is more typical. I mean, from a forecaster's point of view, it's nice to see something that you get more. Like you understand it, you know what's going on, you know the high pressure is going to be there, you know these storms will be, trying to energize off the East Coast, and it seems like for a while, Kyle and I were just talking about this a little bit, that it's like you were trying to pick out these little nuances in the forecast to what's the word here, to pinpoint where those bands of snow are going to actually fall. And it was quite difficult to look at several different things. And it's just nice to have, okay, we have a big high pressure. We know there's the moisture coming up from the south. We know it's going to overrun everything and create snow. It just gives just a little level of comfort to the forecast.
Yeah, exactly. Like when things are forced so strongly, yeah, it's not like you're depending on some like thin.
Norlands,
Yeah. It's like those forecasts
upper
are.
level lows,
Yeah, like those forecasts are horrifying.
little convergence zones that come off the Great Lakes, or a coastal front exact position. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
all those things have been factors so far this year, which have complicated things, to say the least.
It's been a rather active and tough forecasting year already so far. I mean, just for everybody in the Northeast and in parts of the Midwest, Mid Atlantic. I mean, we're only we're only 2 weeks really into winter, official not meteorological winter, but astronomical winter, I guess you want to call it. But it's either way, it's we got a long way to go here, and you know
Yeah, we're just going into the new year for sure. And I just want to say too is that, Kyle, I know this is a typical pattern that you want to see if you're going to get a snowstorm to occur. Is there anything historically that we can look back to say, oh, this is reminiscent of this year, or this, when this storm occurred, or something like that? Because a lot of people like to look at that and say, like, oh, well, this looks like 96, or this looks like, and I don't want to that's just one that came to the top of my head. So
yeah, the analogs have got to be screaming. I've already seen posts for the January, the weekend of January 10th compared to March of '93 already. I'm like, there's not even
No,
close to that.
93 isn't. No, 93.
Exactly.
I would say probably the best match that I've seen, or the ones that I've looked at, comparing the month broadly, or at least the first 2 3 weeks of it is probably January 2011. That's probably the one that stands out the most. Like you have the same tall ridge out west. You have a good amount of blocking, but it's not the level of blocking because like people will always bring up like February 2010 or something, which is just not like like you're not always going to get like an absolute monster block. That's also kind of why like January 2016 that might also get brought up every now and then. I don't think that that's really that analogous either because that was also like a really strong El Nino and the blocking was really really strong there. Now, January 2011 had that same tall ridge out west. It had like strong blocking like we're gonna have here, but not like crazy strong. And it had the same like deep trough out in the east all the way out through the Atlantic. And that was also a La Nina. That La Nina was stronger than this one, but honestly, like when you're at this point in the season and you're forecasting like just a few weeks, like the strength of stuff like ENSO, like you're not factoring that into like a medium to long range forecast. Like it just doesn't. It's good for a seasonal or monthly purpose, but in terms of like something like this, like just because there was a strong La Nina doesn't really mean that it's not viable. It's just the fact that it is one and you're not dealing with like a loaded subtropical jet, it's still very useful. And that was a good month. Like January 2011 was like a prolific month. I don't know if you're going to get as prolific of a month because in New England and the northern mid-Atlantic, people got absolutely smoked. Like I don't think like it's tough to bank on like a 30-inch month for like New York City. I mean, you can never do that. But I would say like if people kind of like know what I'm talking about or remember that month, like I could see a month like that where it's just cold, you have opportunities for snow like pretty consistently, and you can definitely get like a big one or two. Certainly possible.
Yeah, I know there was a decent. What was the biggest storm during that time period in January 2011? Wasn't there something that dropped like, I don't know, 10 to 20 or something like that, or is that too much?
So there was one storm that was really big for New England. It was January 11th. I'm seeing that one was actually comparable to February 2013 or Nemo as it's referred to sometimes. That one kind of similar. And then for the northern mid-Atlantic, for like New York City, there was the late January storm. That's probably the one you're thinking of.
That's probably it, yeah.
Yeah, that was like January 26th or something like that. It was just like it was a quick mover, but it was a bomb. Probably dropped like 12 to 18 inches over the course of like 8 hours over New York City. So not to say that we're going to get two monster storms. You can never bank on something like that. It's not possible. But the potential exists definitely for a larger storm. And again, I think right now the time frame to watch is probably around the 10th. Then after that, I mean, as the pattern, I mean, we're probably going to, I mean, at some point, even the coldest patterns moderate. As you see a moderation of this pattern and the cold start to kind of recede, that's when you can also maybe see another larger storm kind of like, end of the month, probably like last week of the month, something like that. It wouldn't be that crazy.
Yeah, it's typical to see at least the chance for a larger significant storm at the beginning of a pattern change and at the end, right?
Yep, at the beginning and the end. That's usually when they come to fruition.
But who knows? Maybe this will never end. Maybe it'll just stay cold all the way through February.
I mean, generally we were thinking that the La Nina is gonna kind of rear its head a bit in February, but like I'm not like resigned to that right now. It's not a certainty. I mean, like December was very cold. January looks like it's gonna be very cold, and there were years that were like that sort of like 2010 2011 like I just mentioned. That had a very cold December. That had the blizzard in late December, the Boxing Day blizzard. And then January 2011, and then February was like a torch. It was so warm. Like the year ended in the first week of February. I don't anticipate that here. I think February is probably going to be like you're definitely going to get periods of moderation, but like I don't know, like you're seeing signals that like a lot of the high pressure near Alaska kind of lingers a little bit. There might be a little bit of blocking that lingers. A lot of the time when you have blocky winters, they just kind of pop up. Like this block wasn't forecast well that long in advance. It wasn't like the blocks beforehand that's showing up like 3 weeks out. Like no, it popped up like a couple weeks ago, and it honestly, this time right now into early January, like if you asked me 2 weeks ago, you would think they would just remain warm. Like I think February is definitely going to moderate. I think it'll definitely be better for like New England because you're going to get that southeast ridge starting to pop up, and probably a bit worse for the Mid-Atlantic. But I don't know. I I wouldn't bank on a February like we've seen, like I don't know, something like February 2023, like 2 years ago, where it was just warm and snowless. Like it just like the winter just doesn't have that feel.
Yeah, and
So
you had mentioned that in one of our previous storm meetings here at WeatherWorks. That yeah, we're going to moderate, and yeah, we may see the southeast ridge kind of pop up a little bit at going into February. But even you said that there's still some blocking left over, and even if there is some kind of a trough that develops out west, and maybe you get more of a troughiness back towards Alaska. It's still there still looks like there's a decent supply of cold air. Again, you don't need it to be overly cold, right? It's still the snow. It's still February.
yeah, exactly. And like it's gonna take a while to scour all of it out. Like it's not like you're going from like a pattern like we're having right now, right? Like where it's just super warm across the entire United States. And then you're dealing with like a southeast ridge or something like that. Or maybe like it gets cold for like a week. Like no, like you're like getting a lot of snow cover across the east. Well, not just the east, like Canada too. Like Canada's gonna be cold. So
The
I
source
mean,
region is still cold though.
yeah, so like yeah, if you pop a southeast ridge for like a week or so, yeah, it definitely could get like February, there's going to be periods of time where it gets quite warm, I'm sure. But even when it gets warm, there's going to be cold air in the US. Like it's probably going to be in the west, it's probably going to be in the plains. So all that you have to do really is just kind of tamp it down a little bit and you can get like especially into New England like a southwest flow event, like your thump to mixed terrain, like stuff like that. So no, I wouldn't February shouldn't be like this. I'd be very surprised if February had a pattern like this. Like it would actually be quite shocking, especially with the Atlantic blocking. I find it very unlikely.
Nah, but then it's sun angle season though, so nothing can stick during sun angle season. So
Yeah, exactly. Like once you get past like February 20th, it's like
but we still see the rates will always be the determining factor. Rates will overcome anything.
Right. I mean, going back to January, Kyle, do you see these storms being able to tap into more Gulf moisture? Or are we going to be talking about something that's more dynamically driven, where you're just looking for a bomb to develop on the East Coast? Or, I always like the setups where we get a lot of moisture pumping in from the Gulf because it kind of gives a more of a assuredness to the forecast that you see the moisture coming and you're going, oh man, here it comes. We got this. No problem with this forecast. Rather than, okay, here comes a storm, and is it going to bomb out in time to throw a big band of heavy snow back or not? So, what's your thoughts on that?
we're already kind of seeing that start to show up. That kind of Gulf moisture. I mean, like there's a storm risk early next week that kind of has that sort of signature. I mean, it's a matter of how far north the thing gets or if it maintains its strength. But like, there's definitely a Gulf connection there. I would say around the 10th and the 11th, there is the potential for a storm that again does have that same kind of feel where like you have a lot of energy just kind of like digging down towards like Texas or like the Gulf Coast. So even though like you don't have that same subtropical jet like you have in an El Nino, you can still get with these amplified pattern systems just kind of tapping the Gulf, even when they, I guess, shouldn't. So no, like I don't think we're gonna get like the Pineapple Express El Nino jet where you just have like tons of moisture getting pumped.
Pineapple Express. I haven't
Because
heard that
that's
one in a
kind of
while.
what happened back in February 2010,
Yeah,
right?
yes, yeah,
Where
exactly.
you have these massive amounts of moisture. I mean, I remember watching those storms develop, and you can see the plume coming out of Texas, and you're going, oh wow, this is no, this is a no-brainer. And then it just gets stuck at a certain point with the block in place, and just can't move any further north. But I'm just thinking to myself, man, I could sure use a good old-fashioned Miller A storm that
Yeah, yeah.
runs from Florida right up the coast. I feel like I haven't seen too many of those recently.
Well, if we're gonna get one in the next couple of weeks, I mean, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like,
I'd be surprised if we don't get something like that at some point.
yeah, I'd be like, if this, I mean, with any pattern, um, it's basically the equivalent of like loaded dice. So it's like you never have like 100% chance. And like it is quite easy to get that impression sometimes when people do say like, oh, this month looks like this, and there was a big storm. So then it's like, oh, well, we should get a big storm. And it's like I would understand why somebody would kind of come to that conclusion. Like I get it, but it's really just saying like I don't know. Let's just say that like New York City has like a 2% chance of getting 6 inches of snow on any given day, which honestly might be high, but just for the sake of comparison, in this pattern, any given day it might be like 8 to 10% or something like that. And again, I'm just making up numbers to kind of prove a point. But so yeah, so that's like it's 5 times higher than usual, but it's still like 10%. It's the same kind of deal with like severe weather outbreaks, like high risks. It's like the climatological odds of you getting like a tornado in any given region are like 0.5% or something. They're very low. But if that goes up to 10%, yeah, it's 20 times higher. It's a big deal. So it's kind of like that. So you can't mail in a massive storm, but it is like as good of a shot as we've had in years. For the Mid-Atlantic, for the Northern Mid-Atlantic, it's probably since February 2021. For the Southern Mid-Atlantic, it's probably like January 2016, even like that far back. And then New England, this might not favor them all that much, but I mean, they could definitely still get a larger storm. I mean, February 2021 could have produced up there. Like Boston still got a decent amount of snow out of that storm. So it's not like let your guard down. But yeah, if you live all the way up in like Manchester or something like that, I wouldn't say that like this is your pattern. But I would say for most of the Northeast, basically from like Hartford down to like Richmond, it's definitely like high alert for the next like 2 weeks. Just gonna have to see how things actually shake out.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's it's going to be the subtle changes, all the little pieces of energy and how they all interact, and if it can phase together to make the big storm. Again, it's always timing. Is it like does this piece of energy coming down from Canada, does it get just far enough in front of the other piece of energy with the southern jet where they miss each other, or do they interact perfectly for a big storm, or does one beat the other one? Again, it's all comes down to timing, and some of the models may not even notice that for a couple of days ahead, and that's where the human meteorological influences, that's where we take over and kind of say, well, this is what we think is going to happen. And even if the models show one thing, we may be looking at something different, and that's the expertise that we use.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of this stuff is just sort of like any sort of long range forecasting or medium. I mean, really any forecasting. But a lot of the medium long range stuff is just kind of intuition, pattern recognition, and just being like, oh, like this is something that's done stuff in the past, and it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly okay to point out that this is analogous to a month that did a lot. Like there's nothing wrong with drawing comparisons. It's just like as you were saying earlier, like if there's anyone on Twitter calling for the second coming of like the Boxing Day blizzard or something, like that's BS. Like you can't do that 10 days. It's literally impossible. But it is not ridiculous to say that this mirrors some of the patterns that have produced big storms like that.
Yeah, that's the important thing to realize, that yes, you may see those clickbait shots of storms occurring on a certain
22.1
date,
inches of Coucher of snow.
Yeah,
right, giving you 2 feet of snow. But the larger point to understand is, yeah, I could probably show you a big storm like that on almost any given day, and it's gone the next on the same model when it comes out with its new run. So the takeaway point is not so much that on January 10th we're getting 2 feet of snow. It's that the pattern is ripe to produce it, and that's why you see a big storm develop and then go away and then maybe come back, or then something a little bit different happen. That's you're just starting to see these models crop up, and that's due to the larger scale pattern that Kyle's been talking about the whole time. That the first thing you need is that large scale pattern to match up to what produces a good snow scenario. And once you have that, then if you see the storms starting to show up on models, then we start gaining some confidence that there could be a bigger storm within this pattern. So please, if you see those storms out there on whatever you're looking at on any social media, just grain of salt and just don't go with it because I just know how it goes. Then I have, my mom and the guy at the grocery store, and oh my gosh, we're gonna get a blizzard. Well,
No, my mom will do the same thing. She'll watch the local newscast, and I'll tell her, hey, we're gonna get a couple inches of snow. That's not what this guy says. Well, who are you gonna listen to? Your son or the meteorologist or the guy on TV?
well, Brad, honestly, I wouldn't trust you either. So
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
joking.
I
I'm
wouldn't
joking.
either. I know.
But yeah, like good point. Where like generally when you see like those monster storms on models, you just kind of throw them out and you don't even give them like a second look. But here is like the one time where you'd be like, oh, like this might actually do something. Like it's not that ridiculous.
Yeah, and this also gives you confidence in the other way too. When you see a storm get lost on a model or get squashed or something like that, that it's just not taking shape, you say, but wait a minute, the pattern is conducive for this. So let's just hold on a second. Let's not jump off the bandwagon right away because this will probably come back in some fashion or another. So let's not just throw it out the window right away and start waffling back and forth because so that's kind of what I like about the situation and where I was going with the forecaster comfort because you know that this pattern produces, so it gives you a little more confidence to say that things will eventually happen. So but man, this has been a good discussion so far, I'd say.
Anything else, Kyle? I got.
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like we kind of covered everything. I think.
I have a feeling we may have another revisit here in the next couple of weeks. We'll see.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, if we do have that big storm kind of show up, maybe we can run in quick and get something out there and talk about it a little bit.
And that's the thing. I mean, we weren't really planning on doing an update here, but that's weather. Things change, and you got to address the changes, and you roll with the punches. But at least, like you said, during that winter outlook back in November, we did mention, yeah, there were some changes here towards the end of our outlook that we're gonna have to keep an eye on. And sure enough, like Kyle said, they all kind of came to fruition in December, and not only that, now as we go into January. So. I'm glad we had a chance to do this and discuss this, and we'll absolutely keep up with it for sure.
Let's hope at the end of January that we can go back with Kyle and say, "Hey, Kyle, great job on on that prediction."
Kyle, and we gotta give shout out to Kevin Winters too. Of course, he's in on the long term.
Yeah,
guys.
absolutely.
And Kyle and Kevin do a great job with our long range outlooks, and several others too.
Yeah, I mean, and stuff like that, Kyle, I'm just pointing it out because people remember that type of stuff. When you predict stuff weeks out that it's going to get cold, it's going to get stormy. I still have a local radio station that every time I talk to them, they talk to me about the one February that ended up getting really bad with storm after storm after storm. It was probably it. And they still bring that up and say, "Man, you guys nailed that so much." So I'm rooting for everything to go right for our long range team here because I think it is on that verge. I'm really confident that
really should be some. I would be shocked if this didn't. I would be shocked. I mean, it's never impossible. It isn't impossible, but like, man, like, I don't know, like
yeah, there's a lot of pieces that have to fall apart here.
Like, because you're gonna have multiple opportunities. Like this isn't like I guess I mean, I'm still kind of like annoyed about how last February went. But even before the February, in January, we did have that really favorable pattern, but it only lasted like a week, and you had one crack at it. You had one crack at it, and it didn't come together that well. It still produced snow, but it was like super disorganized, and like, it produced like 3 inches of snow in like 24 hours. Like, who cares? I mean, like, so this, though, on the other hand, you're going to have multiple chances. Like, you're going to have the chance on the 6th, you're going to have the chance on the 10th, you're probably going to have one after that, and then you're probably going to have like more as the pattern lessens. Like you're going to have, you're just going to keep loading the chamber and just like seeing what pops. And that's common with these kind of patterns. So, I mean, also, speaking of last year, this isn't really the same as last February, because I remember when we did a video on it, that stuff was still quite a ways out. That was still probably like 10 days out at least. Like, this pattern is taking shape within the next like 2 days. Like that, like there is no shot that block doesn't form. It is, it's going to. I mean, it's forming in 3 days. Like I would be stunned.
You heard it here first.
It's like it's different if in terms of how long the block sustains, that's a different story. But in terms of it forming, it forms in 3 days. Like I don't see how this.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty substantial block to just go decaying away.
If this was a week out, you'd have a bit more caution with it. But 3 days with the pattern feature that large, that shows up on everything. I don't think that this would be I don't think that this would be a similar, like for anybody thinking about last year, I don't think that the comparison is really useful. It's just a different scenario, and the time scale is much shorter.
Well, on that note, on that confident ending from our long range guy Kyle, Brad, I think let's wrap this up. What do you say?
Yeah. You know what? One final comment, Mike. I like what you just said about 2 minutes ago. You said there's a lot that has to fall apart for this kind of stuff not to occur, as opposed to normally we're always like, well, we need a lot of stuff to come together for this path.
Yeah, there you go.
It's nice to have the opposite for a change, especially if you like the snow and the cold like that. So
I do like the other end of the
I agree.
coin.
I know where you're coming from. But Kyle, thank you so very much again for being with us. We'll call you back if we need to here in the middle of winter as we go forward. But appreciate you being on.
Yeah, of course.
And really, that'll about wrap it up for today's episode. And be sure to subscribe to the Weather Lounge, and we'll notify you when new podcasts drop. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of the Weather Lounge podcast. Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on all your favorite podcasting platforms so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have questions or comments? Just email us at weatherlounge@weatherworksinc.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can also learn more about our parent company, WeatherWorks, by visiting weatherworksinc.com and checking them out on social media as well. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, stay curious and stay weather-wise.